Today we'll be talking about the GT72, which is a high-performing gaming machine. And as you might have noticed, we recently launched a couple of new MSI GT72s with the 980M graphics solution, and also 970M, by the way. But anyway, and those of you who already bought the 870M or 880M graphics solution-based GT72 might feel a bit left out, but you shouldn't do. Because one thing we haven't told you about the GT72 is that it actually features an upgradable MXM design. This means, in short, that you can take your old GT72 based on the GTX 870M or 880M and upgrade it to the 970M or even 980M graphics solutions, which is now the prevailing graphics solution. So this video is about us showing you how to upgrade that. So before me on the table, you have what you'll be getting in the actual upgrade kit. This is obviously a new bit for the cooler, we'll get into that later, and the MXM module itself with the 980M or 970M, whichever you choose to purchase. Now, before we go any further, I just want to take the opportunity to warn you that if you decide to do this operation yourself and you break something in the process, this will not be covered by warranty. So please have that in mind before you decide to do this, and only do it if you're 100% sure of your abilities. All right, step one is obviously turning the notebook upside down so you can open it. And here you have the 7 screws you have to access, and basically undoing them with a standard Phillips 1 head screwdriver. And once you've undone the screws, you simply take hold of it in the middle of the rear section and carefully lift it. Doesn't sound too careful, but it's safe. And then gradually work your way around it. So here you see the MXM graphics module we'll be working with, and we'll get to that eventually. First though, you have to make sure that the system isn't full of power, and you do this by removing this little cable here, which is the actual battery cable. Jiggle it a bit, you'll get it out, and there you go. No power in the system anymore. The next thing you should do is remove the fans. And the fans have little rubber bushes on them you should take care not to lose. But also they're suspended in 3 screws, these 2 large ones here. Once you have the fan removed, you should also take care to remove the cable. And then you simply redo this on the other side as well. Take out the cable. Now we can get to the cooler assembly, and as you can see, it is actually split into 2 parts, but it's the one and the same assembly. So you have the one for the CPU here, and you have the GPU cooling assembly over here. So what we have to do is remove both of these. The GPU one is done with 6 screws, the CPU one is done with 4 screws, and these screws are numbered, so you simply just go from number 1, 2, 3, 4 as you normally would. So that's what we'll do. Working on the GPU side cooler, make sure you notice the 2 small screws, which are also numbered 5 and 6. Actually, that's number 6. And these are completely removable, not suspended like the other 2, so make sure not to lose these. And also, for the love of God, don't start yanking the cooler before you've removed these screws. That way you'll end up with some really tough damage, which you will obviously not be wanting. So once you've undone these 10 screws, what you have to do is gently remove it. First, wiggle it a bit, lift it up and wiggle, and see that everything has come apart as it should, so there's no threads left in. Not 100% sure on the CPU side here, to be honest. So I will just double check my work again. Safer to undo the screws a couple of times than just rushing things and destroying everything. Once you've undone all screws, make sure to wiggle it around a bit to make sure nothing is still stuck in, and you can clearly see that there's quite a lot of play here. And note that you have the heat pipes going to each corner of the notebook where the fans were. So this is the thermal assembly, obviously. So you simply lift it up from the chips and then move it backwards or inwards or whatever you want to call it. And this corner comes out first because this one is actually a bit further in. But yeah, basically you just slide it out and make sure you're not interfering with anything, bumping into things, because this is actually metal and you can easily shear off a component on the motherboard. And here is obviously the MXM graphics card we spoke about. This is a really simple one. If you've ever changed RAM in a computer, you will know approximately what to do with this. The difference is this is actually fastened with a screw, one single screw, which you just undo. And just like RAM, SO-DIMM, it comes up at an angle. It has some play in it. And what you do is basically really gently just pull it out. No force needed at all. And you have a graphics card in your hand. What you then have to do is obviously bring out your new graphics card, or the 980M in this case, and simply slot it back in at the same angle it came out. You just push it down, redeem your screw you just removed, and there you have it. The next part is modifying the cooler assembly, because as you remember, there was a new part of the cooler assembly, and we'll get into that right now. Now, here we have the two thermal assemblies next to each other. Here is the old one, and here is the new one. The new one is obviously required because you will the new 970M and 980M has the GPU and peripherals positioned a bit differently from the old ones. So what we need to do to make this work is simply redo the heat piping from the CPU side of things, which is done with these 4 screws, and then simply disassemble it. These two parts will be installed separately. As you can tell from this one, it says it's number 7, 8, 9, 10, which means these should be done after the 4 GPU screws and these 2 screws, and they're the last part of the cooler to go on. So assembly of the cooler is done with, as I said, the coolers separately. So you put on the CPU cooler first, you just slide it in and do up the screws. It's a good opportunity to redo your thermal paste if you wish, and simply do the screws in the order you are told to by the cooler itself. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Secondly, you mount the GPU side of the cooler, and simply make sure it slides in underneath the plastic panel towards the back, and then comes the tricky bit, which is actually fitting it onto the GPU. Make sure everything seems to fit by hand power first. Make sure to find the mounting holes and thread it in carefully. Once you're satisfied and know and feel that everything works without any resistance, you can resort to a screwdriver. And once more, make sure it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Do them up in order. And of course, you should not do this before removing the plastic covers for the thermal paste or the thermal pads on the cooler itself. We trust you know how to do that, since you're hardcore enough to actually watch this video. And once you've done these 4 screws, remember those 2 small ones, which are number 5 and 6. And with these 6 screws in place, now comes the bit where you have to fasten the cooler assembly onto the CPU cooler with the thermal bridge. This should be much easier for you guys, because this is actually what we call an internal sample, which is slightly shoddy. And then bring forth the small screws. New ones are supplied in the hardware kit, which you received with the upgrade kit. And there it is. The cooler assembly is mounted. Now it's just time for the fans again, and then we're just about done. So once you've done up the thermal assembly, the last part is obviously putting the fans back together. Make sure to fit the fan connector first, because those are partially, at least the one on the left is partially underneath the fan itself. So pop in the connector and then make sure you don't lose any of these rubber grommets, because that suspends the fan, and make sure those vibrations stay out of your system. So you don't want any of those. Make sure to align the fan nicely and do up the two bigger screws first. Then simply redo the process on the other side. It's easier because there's more clearance for the fan. Simply pop the fan in, again making sure you align the mounting hardware. One last thing is obviously the battery cable, which simply is to be put back in its socket, making sure you align it right so you don't bend the pins. It's hard to show on camera, but push it down until it won't go any further carefully, and you're done. All that's left is putting the cover back on, and then you can enjoy your new performance. So once you're done with the graphics card upgrade, you will want to boot up your system and check that everything works, which it does in our case, and also install some drivers. Once you've done this, you can run a benchmark to compare against, say, the old 870M you used to have, or maybe you had an 880M. Regardless, you can do some benchmarking, check the difference. The 900 series is a great step forward from the 800 series from NVIDIA, and yeah. These numbers are basically mind-blowing, so we're really impressed ourselves, and we hope you will be as well. Also, if you purchase a GT72, which actually comes with the 980M or 970M, you don't need to feel like you've missed out on something, because it will actually be upgradable to the next generation NVIDIA GPUs, which we don't have an exact date, but maybe late 2015 or so. So the GT72 is a properly upgradable gaming notebook from MSI.